In a food factory, change happens when something goes really wrong, often. So it's when they've found an allergen and they've had to shut a line and not sell products or do a recall. And then they'll never do that ever again in their lives. And that's when they ring in saying, right, what do we need to do next time? It's a shame that it's that way, but it is.
Welcome to the O for Food's Sake podcast, where we unwrap the joys and struggles of working in the food industry so you can thrive in what you do best while sustaining a rewarding and fulfilling career or business. We are your hosts, Lucy Wager, food industry consultant,
and Amy Wilkinson, food industry coach. We've worked in the food industry for the last 20 years and we're here to share with you the benefit of our hindsight. Our podcast is for you to find new ways to cope with the daily struggles, but mostly to inspire you to work on what's not working to ultimately improve your career or business long term.
Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of O for Food's Sake. Today we have one of our favourite guests on, Danny Franklin from Microsearch Laboratories. So welcome back to the podcast, Danny.
Hi, Danny.
Oh, thank you. Hiya. Nice to see you both.
Seasoned professional with us.
Seasoned professional, if only.
So Danny has been on the podcast before. So if you want to hear all about his career journey, then that's a great episode to listen to. But we are going to do a bit of an episode all about, well, not all about, but touching on allergen management. So Danny, welcome back, and really happy to have you back on the podcast. So I know this was an episode that you wanted to do. So first of all, tell listeners who don't know you, quick intro to yourself.
Quick intro, yeah. Okay, so I'm Danny Franklin. I'm the Managing Director at Microsearch Laboratories. We're a food testing lab based in West Yorkshire, but we cover the entire country, Wales and Scotland as well. Predominantly focused on microbiological, nutritional and allergen testing services.
Right. And I remember last time we spoke, you're saying there was a big increase in allergen testing. So we thought this would be a good topic to cover. So why was it this topic in particular that you wanted to focus on?
Yeah, thanks. So last year, there was a really big allergen situation in the UK relating to peanut in mustard powder. It was all over the FSA's website. Dozens of recalls on different products affecting all kinds of manufacturers. And I just thought, with the increase in testing from that, the severity of what an allergen reaction can do to somebody, it just made sense that we raised a little bit more awareness about it and had a chat. On that topic, I pulled out a few interesting stats just to kind of highlight how important it is. So everyone's heard of salmonella if you work in food safety. Normally, if someone dies of salmonella poisoning, it's because they've got some kind of immune deficiency, usually. An able, fit person can normally fight it off with antibiotics and a bit of medical intervention. So on average, it's 33 deaths a year from salmonella, and there's 204 positive cases a year. So 204 cases. So that might sound a lot, but actually, if you think about it... It's not really,
is it? No,
when you think about the size of the population.
Exactly. So listeria, again, everyone's heard of listeria, monocytogenes, 26 deaths a year, 10,200 cases a year.
That's
a hell of a lot more
isn't it?
cases there. And then you look at allergens. So actually, there's only been 10 deaths a year, which is still terrible.
It is,
but it's less than the others, probably because of things like EpiPens saving the day.
Because know if you've got an allergy, whereas a food poisoning,
Exactly. But then check this statistic: 108,000 people had an allergy poisoning.
Wow.
Last year, 108,000,
and they're the ones that are recorded. So they would have been bad.
Exactly. So it's so serious. And, you might get salmonella in your product, you might get listeria, and the chances are no one's going to die. The chances are. But with an allergen, you actually are dicing with death. So it makes total sense to have a conversation like this, I think.
It's actually giving me shivers a little bit when you say that, just because like my daughter's best friend, her little brother is allergic to lots and lots of different things. And some of the stories I've heard,
So scary.
where, they just don't know the allergens there. And she's been in the doctor's surgery and like the doctors are trying to send them away, and she's having to EpiPen her kid. And when you actually put real life in it. And then if you think of those numbers, it's quite scary.
I saw Natasha's Law, the teenager that died from eating I think it was a baguette with this undeclared sesame.
Yeah.
So I saw them talking. It was at a food service trade show.
Yeah.
And and it was specifically for schools and catering. They did a talk about the importance of allergen management.
Yeah.
And it was, they are so brave what they are doing to educate people. And, when you see how it impacts a consumer and, the ripple effect, it's so important, isn't it? And that example that you gave, Danny, was it an accidental contamination, or do they know how it happened?
What, the peanut one?
The peanut and mustard?
Yeah. It's theoretical at the minute. Sometimes with cases like this, it's really hard to actually know the exact cause. But you may remember a few years ago, there was an issue with garlic powder coming from certain countries, places like India and China. And what happens is farmers who are growing garlic, because it's a seasonal produce, they also grow other things in the soil at different times.
Oh, I see.
So they grow peanuts.
Yeah.
And then the opposite end of the season, they harvest the peanuts and then they've got a field spare. So they'll grow garlic as an example. The soil is covered in peanut allergen and that absorbs into the garlic. So the actual farmer, probably not on purpose, has no idea that he's contaminating crop.
That's a really good point as well, because when I've done some work on sustainability and the impact of growing and engaging with people all along the food chain, the statistic about how, I can't remember what the statistic is, it's like 75% of our food is produced by these small farms, then sell into cooperatives. It's very difficult to control at that level, isn't it? When they're small family run, through the generation farmers.
That's right.
And you don't necessarily think about that impacting on your allergen management.
No, because you're just thinking about your own factory or whatever, but it's actually right down the supply chain.
Yeah. And often you're relying on the producers or the suppliers of the raw materials to kind of tell you and give you the right information. And often they don't know. So they'll say, we'll go to the farmers and say, right, do you produce peanuts? No, peanuts have been nowhere near this crop. And they haven't, but they were in March. And they don't understand the fact that they've contaminated the soil. So to them, they're telling the truth, but they're misinformed. And the same happened with this instance. It's believed, and I'm saying believed because it's still a big investigation, but it's believed that the same things happened here. It's farmers growing peanut and then switching to mustard in the same field, and then that's been imported.
And so was this picked up because someone had a reaction, or was it picked up through testing?
My understanding is it was picked up through testing.
Right.
Which shows the importance of testing, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was just going to say. This is why it's we kind of think, because a lot of the cases that we've seen in the media and stuff like that, I'm trying not to say the names of companies because I'm not wanting to but we get this headline that it's the end retailer or whatever that's the problem. But actually it's so many rungs down the line, and that's where this allergen testing all along the supply chain is so important, isn't it? It's not just end product.
Yeah, and that's why it's important for everybody in the food industry to understand their part of allergen management and questions, and when to get when to get tested. That sounds like you're getting tested. When to get products tested. Because there's the reason I asked you how it had come about is because the other thing, I suppose the reason that testing needs to increase is because obviously there are so many more people with allergies.
Yes.
So that's one reason. But then there's also this whole underlying food fraud and the increase in food fraud, which I know is also a big issue when it comes to allergens, isn't it?
Massive issue, yeah. And a lot of countries have shortages. If they've had bad weather, for example, and all of the farms in a region of a country have lost the crop, that makes a national shortage. So it's in some people's interests to potentially cut that crop with something else so that they can still meet the demand, or farm it somewhere else where they don't have the best controls in place. Those types of things. And I think even at government level, there's initiatives where the government will give farmers grants and money to grow certain crops when they know there is shortages. So you've got then someone with a piece of land setting up a farm overnight because there's some investment coming to them to do that. And they don't have the experience and the skill really to be able to do it.
Yeah, to have those controls.
I've heard as well that some of those farmers, they also buy the soil in. So if their soil isn't very good, they buy it from another source and use.
And they wouldn't know what's been grown.
Yeah, so the soil could be contaminated, and they have never touched a peanut. But if they've bought soil from somewhere else, that might have it in already.
God, it's so complex, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so it's actually quite terrifying.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I think this highlights, when you're going through BRC and you're having to go to like the ends of the earth to investigate, and you can feel like, what is the point of this? Like, why, this is taking so much resource. Well, this is the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, these are the risks. And it's not that anybody's doing it intentionally, because obviously there is food fraud where it is intentional. But there can be things that aren't intentional, and it's not known. The risk there isn't known. So therefore, we need to have the checks in place, and we need to do the testing to make sure that the food is safe when it comes to putting in your food product.
Yeah. So how do labs like Microsearch help with this sort of stuff? How do they identify these ingredients and stuff?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. So the first thing you want to be doing if you're a food manufacturer is testing the finished product that you make.
Yeah.
Most manufacturers will do that on a routine basis. So it might be once a year, once a month. It's really dependent on how much of that product they make. So that's something we do. And another area where we support the industry is by offering a buyback service. So this is a really good thing where you actually go into a supermarket and buy the product off the shelf. So rather than it coming from a factory,
where it's been handpicked and
you get given a list of products and a schedule, and every month you go and buy 10 of these, 3 of these and 2 of these. You test them and send the results back to head office. And it's a really good, smart way of checking that what people are really buying is compliant. And the other part of that is checking your suppliers. And we do lots of raw material checks and tests, support people with risk assessing the raw materials to check, what's the background of that raw material? What country has it come from? What's the history of risks coming from that particular country? And we can help people put a risk assessment and a plan together then to ensure compliance. And an area where lots of people forget is if you buy a raw material, let's say, let's say you're buying a raw material that is already an allergen, like mustard. So it's already an allergen. It's really easy to think that the only concern is the mustard because it's a mustard product. Yeah. So they'll have loads of controls around. We've got mustard on site. Let's make sure it's segregated, and we've done the cleaning validation and all of this. But actually, often it's forgotten. Well, where's that mustard been? There could be anything in that mustard. And that's where a lot of people get caught out because they don't think about that.
Because it's not the natural link, is it? You're worrying about the obvious, but it's actually the not so obvious that's the bigger risk, because that's where you haven't got it on the pack. So that's where the consumer risk comes from, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think from Microsearch's point of view and my personal point of view, I'd always recommend to clients, if you get a new supplier, it's just worth having a conversation with your lab and just saying, we've got this new supplier, this is where the material's coming from, this is what we plan on doing with it. Have you got any thoughts? Have you done any horizon scanning? And just getting an overview.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, Danny, because until I met you, really, Danny and I met when I've just realised, talk about full circle. So you and I met when I started podology.
That's right.
I was using Microsearch as my lab, and you would have been doing the allergen testing for me on my dairy-free desserts. Here we are, full circle. But what I didn't really appreciate, because I hadn't really been involved in it, to be fair, before, but the reason that we still know each other and I always recommend Microsearch is because of that level of service that you offer in terms of, this is what my problem is, these are the products that I'm using, this is what I'm thinking of doing, like, and the support that you get is really useful. Yeah. Especially when you're talking about things like this, that you might not have expertise in the business and you need that additional support.
That's what I was just going to say. It's that it's the heart of your business along with all the other testing that you do. So you sit with, I always think we all kind of sit on the peripheries of what we're experts in, but you're the experts in that area. So actually being able to go and ask those questions of an expert is like really, really valuable. And I don't think people always think of it. They're like, head down, we've got our technical team, we've got to do this, but actually use your suppliers.
Collaborative working.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that feels really scary. And particularly for sort of SMEs or smaller businesses that might not have like a big technical department, it can feel really intimidating and really scary. And actually some of the things that you say, Danny, are very scary. But
but it doesn't have to be.
But having that structure around you is what's really important, isn't it?
Right, yeah. I'm friends with a chef, and he told me a funny story a little while ago, just saying how he developed anxiety when all the kind of laws came in over the years around, someone comes to your restaurant, you have to tell them that you've got an allergen, and he's kind of saying, it's now on my head to make sure that I don't know somebody. Yeah, and all of a sudden he's got this anxiety around, making sure he doesn't make a mistake or one of his team doesn't make a mistake in this like high-pressured environment.
Yeah. Well, and I work a lot with MPD teams, and they'll almost be like, oh, why are technicals so negative all the time? Going, and like when you're talking, it's just an allergen. Like, why does it matter? I'm like, we think we're the pressure. Actually,
it's life or death.
Or death, and you being the one that's going to end up in court if somebody dies as a result. I mean, it's obviously about the death, but it is a real pressure, and I've seen it with friends that are quite senior in technical. Like I've sat in the pub with them in tears, worrying about whatever. Obviously, I won't go into details, but it really is important. And like you say, Lucy, smaller businesses that have no idea.
And I actually think smaller businesses, similar to the farmers, smaller businesses might not recognize the risks as well. So if you're not going through BRC and sort of being forced to go through these risk assessments and that kind of thing, you could be in a situation where if you're a small brand and you're outsourcing the production, you need to be really mindful of the risk assessments that they're doing on their raw material suppliers, because you don't know where those ingredients are coming from. So I think it's always worth, and one thing that I always do is when I always check to see what labs suppliers are using when I'm working with clients to understand, to make sure it's a lab that I recognise, or, something isn't quite right, then I'll contact you, Danny, and be like, well, could you just do this test to see if it correlates? Because that's the other thing. There's no harm in looking around and seeing what's available, and different labs have different expertise and different people, and I think it's important to develop those relationships and be able to have those conversations, isn't it? And be informed of when things change and things are happening in the industry. Because I think it was you that told me about the mustard and peanut thing.
Yeah. And what you're both saying is completely right, because it's something I'm really passionate about. Is in the food industry, you have the manufacturers, and then they'll usually work with BRC, SALSA, the retailers, and the FSA, the local environmental health. And it's kind of like a circle where all the information and data sharing and work revolves around that type of group of people. Actually, probably the most knowledgeable people on that subject are not in the group, which is the people who are going to be doing the testing. The lab is always the people like, well, they just do the testing.
Actually, you're a source of experts in it, because that's what you do all day. I wonder if there's like almost, it's probably just my perception, and we need to come and see you, Danny, at some point to like debunk this. It's like, because, well, I don't know, actually at Bakkavor, like this is years ago, I don't know if they still do, they had an in-house lab. So I just used to think of, it's just people in white coats with Petri dishes, and like, are they going to have all of that extra knowledge because they're just doing it? Well, and obviously you do, like, I wonder if there is that perception of, that you haven't got the breadth, you're just doing that thing, but actually, it's the lifeblood of your business, so obviously you're going to know everything about it.
Yeah, it's a really good point about the in-house lab, because most businesses don't have in-house labs now. And I had this exact conversation with a supplier, and we were like reminiscing about back in the day, and he's like, I remember like being able to go to the lab, and like if they hadn't done it, I'd just go and finish it off. And I was like, oh my God, I remember taking the samples to the lab at Bakkavor and like when we worked the night shift. But the difference is when the lab is on site, you automatically have that connection to the lab and can have those conversations. Yeah. And I think, I do think maybe something has been lost along the way because everything's been outsourced, and it's the lab that you've never been to, or you don't know the people. So yeah, I feel I've just been thinking we need to do like I was going to say fly on the wall documentary of Microsearch, but now we've got our mobile microphones, we could come and video around, because I don't think I've ever been to a lab other than the lab that was in the factory that I worked in.
Yeah. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick breather here to hear from our fantastic sponsors. They help keep the podcast going, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Ensuring food safety and quality is crucial. That's why businesses trust Microsearch Laboratories, part of the IFP Labs Group. UCAS-accredited Microsearch offers microbiological, nutritional and allergen testing for food, drink and water, delivering fast results and expert support. With over 30 years of experience, trusted by leading manufacturers and retailers, and a commitment to sustainability, Microsearch is your partner in product safety. Visit micro-search.co.uk to learn more. And we're back. Thanks for sticking with us. Let's dive right back in.
It's so different to what you probably imagine as well. I mean, obviously the labs are big, but as you've kind of made the point, a lot of the team are admin people driving round to conferences, to shows, visiting and auditing factories. So, we've got a massive team of people who know the industry inside out. They know the equipment that food factories are using inside out. It's not just standing at a bench chopping food up, which is what people assume.
And are there, on allergens, are there like new innovations in allergen testing and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure how new you'd call this actually, but there's really two streams. So there's the laboratory testing. Usually that's done by a method called ELISA. Yeah, and the ELISA looks for the protein of the allergen. So for anyone who doesn't know, it's the protein that causes the allergic reaction. So that's a misconception that a lot of people have. Well, they'll send a test off and ask for an allergen DNA. Well, the DNA doesn't cause a reaction, it's the protein. So in theory, you'd have protein. If you had protein, you'd have DNA, yeah? But you could have DNA and no protein because the product's been denatured. So there's an ELISA test which looks for the protein, which is the most common, and that makes the most sense because it's looking for the actual allergenic part. You then have a DNA test which looks for the DNA, and that's mostly used when products have been through a really rough process where it's been the protein might have been denatured and therefore isn't detectable. So you use the DNA at that point to try to determine if the allergen's there. More recently, people have invented these sort of rapid test kits. So if you work in the food industry, you'll probably know loads of people that use these now. It's not an accredited thing, but it's kind of a quick, instant way of just checking whether that line that's operating at 10,000 packs an hour, does it have an allergen on it right now? And they can just swab the line as products are moving down and get a result in 5 minutes.
And is that is that like also like a hygiene, testing hygiene?
Exactly.
And yeah.
So you can do it as a swab test or test the surface, or you can actually take a product off and cut some of the product off and put it in like a little vial with some chemicals and it'll change colour if the allergen's there. So it's all very, very smart, but they're really the only three avenues when it comes to allergen testing.
Mm-hmm.
The rapid kits are great, but they're not seen as...
It's not,
it's not an industry standard.
It's not robust enough to,
you can't be making food safety decisions on those rapid. It's just an indication. If you got a positive, that's when you'd go, right, we need to actually send it off to a lab now and get it done officially.
Yeah.
I remember when I had my intolerances and I'd react really badly to, like, if there was dairy in something that I didn't know. And I was like, I wish there was like a test that you could do that would, like, you could dip, but I don't think that exists.
What, at the end consumer, you mean?
Yeah, for the end consumer. Sorry, that's totally a segue onto end consumer. But that would be so helpful for people with really bad allergies. But it's not going to work when you've got to mix it with chemical to get the rapid test. But I'm sure maybe one day that will come.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably not far down the line, to be honest. It makes total sense that that's available. As you said, the minute the kits are loads of little components usually, and, you don't need to be aseptic, but, you can't do it in a Costa, for example. You need to do it on a table somewhere. But it's a really smart idea.
Yeah. And have you got any sort of success stories where you've worked with businesses and helped them with their allergen management and changed things for them, I suppose? And
I mean, absolutely loads, honestly. For us, it's kind of bread and butter. We're doing this stuff every day. The biggest thing where we help in general is with validating their allergen cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of people that get that wrong, and if you get it wrong and then BRC or SALSA turn up and go, you've not got the purpose of this, it's a big problem. So we're really big on promoting, if you use allergens on site, you need to do a cleaning validation. It needs to be robust. Ring us and let us tell you what you need to do to make sure that BRC are not coming back and saying it's not suitable. So that's really the biggest area where we support food manufacturers. And part of a cleaning validation is actually making sure you've got a positive control. It seems so obvious, but what happens is a food manufacturer will go, well, if peanut isn't there, I don't want it to be there. So why would I put peanut there when it isn't there already? I'm just causing more problems for myself. So they do pre-swabs before the clean, they're all clear. They do post-swabs after the clean, they're all clear. And the validation proves that they've cleaned peanut. Well, BRC just say, you haven't cleaned anything because there was no peanut there first, there's no peanut there after.
Yeah.
So I think food manufacturers really have to think about how they do a cleaning validation to make sure they're including the allergen that they're trying to prove as being cleaned. And often that's to do with timing. And what time of day you do it. A lot of cleaning validations are done when the hygiene team are in the night and they're not really cleaning, they're not really making products because it's the easiest time.
And there's also something in that where nobody wants to say something isn't clean or the allergen was there because it feels like, oh no, the allergen is never there. This is never dirty. And that's like not reality, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, it's the difference between wanting to have results that, negative results to, just tick a box versus having negative results that actually prove that you are cleaning properly. It's a different thing. One is like, we've just got to get that further compliance. One is because you're actually checking that you're not going to kill anyone.
And at the end of the day, you'd sleep a lot better at night if it was the second one. But you've got knowing that you've done everything you can to make sure that line's clean.
And I can see how it's an uphill battle for some technical managers because actually, in manufacturing comes first, getting product out the door comes first. So actually having somebody like you and Microsearch to help to shape those arguments to use with the business for the reasons we need to do this is really, really helpful.
Sorry, I was just going to mention, often these things happen. In a food factory, change happens when something goes really wrong, often. So it's when they found an allergen and they have to shut a line and not sell products or do a recall. And then they'll never do that ever again in their lives. And that's when they ring in saying, right, what do we need to do next time?
feel
it's a
like
shame
pain.
that it's that way, but it is.
It is a shame that it's that way, because that's why the incidence of allergen, people that have suffered an allergic reaction, are so high, because things are happening.
Because it's not thought of as big a risk as salmonella and listeria, which is where we started the episode, wasn't it? Talking about that.
Yeah, and maybe that's because, allergens are sort of newer than food poisoning and pathogen risk to general consumer. But I do think when you were talking, Danny, I was thinking, there's also something about like people being aware, like not to scare everybody, but people being aware of, because change only happens, like Natasha's law came in because of Natasha dying, which is an awful reason for such drastic change that actually needed to be done to be implemented. But, I do think it's helpful when you work in the food industry to understand these risks, because when you don't work in technical and you are, you're at the coalface of whatever it is in the food industry that you're doing, because we're all so busy, these life or death risk things you can just not think about too much because it's not part of your everyday. And I think when I was at Sainsbury's, Alec Kyriakides was the technical director there, and he was very good at this and like scaring everybody,
scaring the life out of you.
But he's had a massive impact, I think, on the food industry, because everybody that has worked with him, like, he sort of instilled that need for safety. And I think, I put down a lot of the fact, I started as a product developer, but I've always had this interest in the technical side. And obviously then when I did a dairy-free dessert range, I really needed to step up my technical and understanding of allergens. But I do think, when you work in the food industry, you should be educated on the risks. And I mean, this has sort of taught me something new, Danny, in terms of looking at the supply chain and understanding actually the risk at the growing level and actually how easy that is. I know the risk would be low because a lot of people are like, oh, but tiny risk, but it's the type of thing you just don't want to be taking risks on, because it is a matter of life or death.
Exactly. There was a couple of good examples in the news. One was a long time ago in 2014 when somebody went to prison for killing somebody, and basically they were selling almond powder that was cut with peanut powder because it's much cheaper than almond powder. So totally on purpose. So the almond powder ended up within a company that made like some kind of curry dish, thinking it was peanut free because it was almond powder. Someone ate that and died. And exactly the same thing happened in 2022. Different companies, but it's still going on, even though people are dying.
You can't believe it, can you, that people would do something like that?
I know, it's just horrendous. But it'll be education. I assume even the people who are doing that, they don't want to kill anybody, I'm assuming.
No.
Well, I think they're probably thinking, oh, it's nuts. So somebody with a nut allergy wouldn't react. That is really awful. And that's what I think is scary for brand owners. Obviously, it's terrifying for the consumer that's got an allergy, but really scary for a brand owner, because you could be doing everything right. And just not recognise this risk. And this food fraud is such a big issue, and increasingly such a big issue because of the strain and financial strain that everybody is under, and food security strain. And I think we all need to be aware that it is going to become an increasing risk, and it's something that we really need to look into. And bigger businesses will have the resource to be able to look at it, but I think it's those smaller businesses, of which there are so many, that are really at risk if they don't know the questions to ask.
And I wonder as well, and this is a conversation point because I don't actually have the answer, but I wonder whether if you're a small food manufacturer, whether you have access to the kind of bigger and more respected raw material suppliers, or whether you have to in turn go to smaller, more independent raw material suppliers. I don't know how that works.
Potentially because of minimum order quantities and stuff like that.
It's a bit of a mix of the two, really. But it's interesting because depending, and some smaller suppliers would be really on it and know what they're doing. But the other issue is when you are a smaller business trying to work with bigger businesses, that you might not be able to ask the questions that you need to ask. They might not be that interested in what you're doing because you're only taking a small amount. And so you can still have that barrier communication barrier breakdown as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, Danny, what do you want listeners to be taken away from this episode? What tips, tricks, or just like messages you've got for people listening that working in the industry when it comes to allergens?
I think the number one thing, we've talked a lot about, peace of mind and, whether you can be totally confident that the products you're selling are allergen free. Can you sleep at night confident that you're not going to kill anyone? There's loads of ways you can do that. We've talked about all of these, but actually the biggest way is by doing the buybacks because it's an independent way at board level and company owner level that you can get independent assurance that what you're buying is completely safe to eat. So I'd recommend anybody setting up and starting a buyback program. I really, really would. And it doesn't have to be massive. If you sell one product in a supermarket or online, get it tested once a month, once a quarter. Ask your lab to order it or order it yourself and send it off. And you've got that assurance then firsthand, independently, that it's completely safe. And that is the best due diligence you can have, honestly. That's what I'd say.
Do people do that with microbiological testing as well, or is that?
Yeah. So some of the bigger retailers already do this. Some of the, Aldi, for example, there's a few that already take part in these sorts of things. If you're a retailer, it's expensive because, as you can imagine,
every
there's about
product in store.
100,000 products in the store. So. But, as an independent food manufacturer, there's no reason why you couldn't take that education and use it yourself and ask your lab to go and buy just the product you make.
Yeah. I think the crux of it is, everything that we've talked about today and what you're talking about is that don't just do it as a reactive thing.
Yes.
Do it proactively.
Yes.
Challenge and get that independent and don't wait basically for somebody to die to do something something about it.
And further down or up the line, when you're looking at your raw material suppliers, don't assume anything because it's really easy to assume, they said they'd tested that for peanuts, so we don't need to. We push everything back onto our suppliers, so we don't need to do any testing because they've done it. That's something we hear a lot. That's great that they're paying for it, but do it yourself once in a while just to make sure that it really is what it says it is.
Because it's damaging. Not obviously what we keep talking about, like it could be fatal and it's awful, but it isn't. When we see these big things in the press, they're not naming and shaming the supplier back down there. They're naming the retailer or the manufacturer of the end product. So actually it's important for your brand reputation as well, isn't it?
And it's something I say a lot, even internally here, that trust is the number one word in all of this. It's really, really hard to get trust. And really bloody easy to lose it. And once you've lost it, getting it back's even harder. So, you want the consumers to trust your brand. You want them to trust the shop that they're going in. And as soon as something like that's on the front page of the Daily Mail and your brand's all over, a lot of people are going to think, I'm not going there anymore. I've lost trust in that product or that company.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So, Danny, this has been a really and I always feel like it's funny because I did a food science degree, but I've totally moved away from my technical route. So I'm always like, don't be offended, Danny. Like I've already said,
she loves talking to you, really.
I love talking to you, Danny, because you make this stuff relatable and interesting. So I think other people will feel the same. And the other thing I'm going to say is to anybody listening, Danny's getting really active on LinkedIn and he does these brilliant videos, just talking about stuff. So people need to follow you on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah,
but you probably should also big up Microsearch. So people how they get. So how do people get in touch if they want to find out more about Microsearch?
Yeah, well, you can follow me personally on LinkedIn. So Danny Franklin, the company, LinkedIn's Microsearch Laboratories, website's www.micro-search.co.uk. When it comes to new customers, I really like getting involved in that. Even though I'm the MD, I still love to sort of tell people about what we do. So anyone is welcome to ring me personally, send me a DM on LinkedIn personally. You don't need to just kind of go through the main reception number.
Yeah.
So yeah, LinkedIn.
And you have brilliant conversations with Danny. I'll just say that to anybody listening.
do you know what? And this isn't on purpose. It's really nice, your compliment there about being relatable. But the honest truth about it is, I'm not an educated person. We've talked about this before. I don't have any GCSEs. I didn't go to college. I didn't go to university. I'm working class from a poor background. And I just say what I think and what I see. And I assume that must just come across like I'm relatable. But it's not on purpose, if that makes sense. It's just...
But you're really good at sharing your knowledge. I mean, the reason that Microsearch have been in my professional network for so long is because you really helped me. You personally helped me when I'd first started podology, and it can feel like an intimidating area because it's not an area that we're all specialists in. But Microsearch make it accessible, which is really, really useful. So the way that you are really helps that, I think.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Danny.
It's been
a great conversation as always.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks. And we'll see you all next time.
See you next time.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, rate and review us. It really helps us reach more food industry pros like you.
For more resources, head over to our website, overfoodsake.co.uk, and join our mailing list to stay in touch.
And if you'd like to connect with us, come say hello on LinkedIn. We're both there, Lucy Wager and Amy Wilkinson.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.